I'm glad to see everyone back from the coffee break, hopefully energized. It's a pleasure to be joining you today, and I was struck by something that Martin mentioned in the previous session on dengue. I'm really diving deeply into a specific area, and I think we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about something very, very big, which is water and the importance of water. To give a little bit of background, and I think we're all aware that water, it's not just an infrastructure or an environmental challenge. And often when we're thinking about, access to water and access to safe sanitation, we immediately are thinking about big infrastructure, construction type projects, large investments, but water is more than that. It's fundamental to human health and well-being. I think that's something that we know intrinsically, but maybe not always at top of mind. And we know that without access to good quality water, people face greater risk of waterborne disease, vector-borne disease. We've been talking about that this morning. And there is a direct relationship between vulnerability and susceptibility to some of those diseases and the results and impacts of both extreme flooding events and climate-induced events that create drought. We also know that health systems are stressed, and even just seeing the video just now, the impact of more people being affected by extreme weather events does place stress on health systems. And we also know that food security deteriorates, and that has consequences for people's access to the nutritious foods that they depend on. It also has sort of upstream impacts on really people's ability to not only survive but thrive for posterity and for productivity individually at the community level, and as our colleagues from some of the financing institutions remind us, also the prosperity of economies in nations. We know that water is inherently local and that it looks different depending on where you are. And communities are often the ones who, especially those that are most vulnerable, are the ones who are, again, as we've said over and over, bearing the brunt of climate-related scarcity and contamination. So in this session, we're really exploring what communities are facing now, what their lived realities look like, what the evidence is telling us about the impact of, again, unchecked pollution, some of the things that were presented during our very first session this morning, rapid urbanization, ecosystem degradation on water resources, all of this happening as climate change accelerates drought frequency, and how we can harness technology and nature-based solutions and scale those in order to protect and preserve both human health, the ecosystems we're living in, and continued and sustained access to the safe water that we depend on. It will be interactive, I hope. I'm happy to be joined in person by two colleagues and colleagues online as well. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll go into some of the questions. First, Alex Noriega, who is the Managing Director of the Guatemala Private Institute for Climate Change Research. Alex focuses on applied climate research and watershed management for Central America, and has helped develop early warning systems and ecosystem-based strategies to address drought and water security. Also joining us online is Fiona Jeffery, who is the founder and CEO of Just a Drop. Fiona founded Just a Drop to provide safe water and sanitation in communities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And her background includes extensive experience in global water advocacy, fundraising, and public-private partnerships, which she'll be sharing with us today. Thank you both for joining us virtually, and I hope you can hear me. Just to check to make sure. Wonderful. Great. And I'm happy to be joined in person so that I'm not sitting all by myself up at the front. Right next to me is Sofia Corradi, who is an emerging researcher focused on water sustainability, sanitation, and climate adaptation. Her work explores the intersection of environmental management and public health outcomes in marginalized regions. And Alejandro Mieses, who leads TerraFirma, social enterprise focused on green infrastructure and sustainable sanitation solutions for underserved communities. Alejandro has deep experience designing nature-based wastewater treatment systems that are low cost, scalable, and community-driven. Thank you again to those of you online and seated next to me. Let's start first at the front lines, where communities are impacted by what's happening in a world where climate is changing all around us. So Fiona and Sofia, as you engage with communities through your work, can you describe for us some of the specific challenges they face and concerns they raise in terms of water security and public health, and how climate stress exacerbates these issues? So as you're really engaging, what are people feeling, what are people seeing, and how does that impact their lives? And happy to, do you want to start, Sofia?
Yeah, I can start, but happy to hear from Fiona as well, because we know that local realities are very unique, and as I try to synthesize what could be the common main challenges for those, we know that something might be missing from what I have as experience. But to mention these top three common challenges that I encounter, we say water scarcity, water quality, and inadequate infrastructure. And water scarcity is not only on the lack of natural sources. We know that this is a problem in many spaces, but we also have the competing of uses. So many local communities, they have to deal with some industrial plantations and other type of monocultures and activities that need to use that water, and they lack in this part of the dispute. So this is a common issue that we encounter. Regarding water quality, we know that contamination has common sources from agriculture, but in my state we also have that from mining, and these are toxic waste, so it's very concerning. But also deforestation. When we have this deforestation in riparian areas, we are affected by in this pollution of water sources. And concerning infrastructure, we usually think in urban spaces and centralized systems, but also mentioning the decentralized solutions, talking about climate change and how these systems must be resilient. Imagine how is that for individual a solution for water supply or sewage treatment. So thinking about the challenges of this decentralized water and sanitation infrastructure, that is also a concern that communities face. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Sofia. And as I'm hearing you, it's just a reminder that water is used for so many purposes. And as you said, communities need to draw on it in different ways. They access it and use it for different things. I'd also, Fiona, I'd like to invite you to speak a bit to sort of your experience. I know you're deeply engaged with several communities.
Hello, yes, lovely to, good morning or good afternoon. It's afternoon for me at present over in London. It's a pleasure to join you all. And can you hear me all right?
Yes, I think so.
Perfect, okay. So just to give some context, Just a Drop works in countries across Asia, Africa and Latin America, largely supporting vulnerable rural communities that are badly affected by water scarcity and pollution, which obviously impacts their health, lives and livelihoods. And we have a phrase in Just a Drop which says, life without water is an endless struggle, but with it, almost anything becomes possible. And I think we all recognise the impact that lack of access to safe water has, particularly on women and girls who are tasked to collect water each day. And we know that from our own experience that in the dry season, in some destinations like Kenya, that's a semi-arid environment in Africa, they can walk up to 12 kilometers a day to collect water. When women and children are doing that and walking these long distances, they are hugely vulnerable to attack, rape, and abduction. And we've experienced in our work in Uganda, for example, that we've been aware that young boys were being abducted and recruited into organizations like the Lord's Resistance Army. There's also the additional health issues that come from carrying a heavy load of water for long distances. So yes, you have neck, shoulder, back issues, which seem logical under those circumstances. But what people often don't realize that it also affects women in pregnancy because they become much more vulnerable to miscarriage as the weight of the water causes them to suffer prolapse of the uterus. And then we have the challenges of drinking dirty water and the health conditions that are caused by diseases such as diarrhea, bilharzia, cholera, and also the risks of contracting malaria if you're collecting water from a stagnant pool. So I think the key point is that with access to safe, accessible water supply, you can grow crops, you can feed your families. With excess crops, you can trade and generate an income. And with an income, you can start to pay for your children's school fees and give them an education and start to create better futures. So water is the critical start to creating healthy lives and healthy livelihoods. And there is no question in my mind that climate change is impacting these rural communities. To give examples, Kenya and Zambia have just suffered the worst droughts in over 40 years, impacting food security and livelihoods. And so the solutions that Just a Drop looks to aim to address are always looking at mitigating climate change to ensure long-term sustainability in a way that communities are able to continue to live safely and securely in their own environments. And my view is if we don't succeed in making this happen, they will have no choice in time but to migrate. And that just creates a whole set of other social and cultural issues and challenges.
Thank you so much. And I again, just a reminder of, with water, challenges associated both with abundance and with inadequacies in terms of access, and also how interwoven water is in our landscapes and in our lives. And as we're thinking about solutions, I'd love to engage some of you. And we know that, again, with water, there's some unique opportunities to take advantage of even nature-based solutions. We know that streams and wetlands can provide natural protections against the health impacts of drought. They can help to reduce the spread of waterborne disease. How might we sort of come together and really bring together what we know about the science-based relationship between water, climate, human health, and sort of what we're hearing from communities, the opportunities that some of these nature-based solutions can afford, and use those to maybe spark innovative community-led solutions, including those that draw on local knowledge. And Sofia, to start to bring those things together, what does emerging research tell us about water access and disease resilience in climate vulnerable communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think research is in a very well-positioned place today because we have access to so many different tools, and trying to connect this discussion on systems thinking, really. And I promise I'll let my colleagues speak. I feel I'm the only one answering. But I want to share a couple of topics that have been on the edge of science today, or really already in implementation. Picking on the point of decentralized systems, I think this connects with resilient and strengthening both health and water. when we have solutions like rainwater harvest and groundwater involving nuclear technologies or other types of things that help to address water scarcity and reduce disease risk. This is a part really emerging, and I want to highlight also the role of young entrepreneurs implementing low-cost solutions because some kinds of the technologies already exist, but how to make them compatible and low-cost to really implement on the ground. We also see another topic on governance and infrastructure gaps because sometimes the different levels are not connected as they could be. So when we see this fragmented management and how limited these financial flows would be, so there is a lot of research looking at this aspect as well. Also considering waterborne disease control and tracking pathogens in water sources. We saw at COVID-19 some research groups were really tracking how much of the population were affected by COVID, looking at the sewage. So this could be also applied to different kinds of problems in water and health themes. And we also have an ongoing theme, which we don't have many answers already. It's on microplastics. So this is also both in the water we drink and the sewage we waste. So how to deal with that and how much of that is affecting our health. I think this is really at the edge right now. And of course, models that include artificial intelligence and machine learning. I think this modeling improves the prediction for water demand and also the impacts of droughts and the disease outbreaks. I know that a group that is on a model for global feedbacks and loops when you know that one change in part of the system, let's say melting the Arctic, how that impacted different systems and return as feedbacks. So there is a group looking now that there was before a model that did not consider the Arctic, and they had some outcomes considering the disease outbreaks in that scenario, but now they are including the Arctic melting and all of the consequences on that, and they see that how much of the disease outbreaks they weren't expecting coming. So I think technology tools really help us to deal with those things, and I could talk more about that, but maybe we could return to this topic later or at lunchtime.
I think it's great, and I love the reminder that you know during COVID, water also became a source of information, right? So we can also harness water as a solution as much as just sort of being part of life, and I realize. I suppose that we should let the gentlemen on our panel have a word. Starting with you, Alejandro, I know you do some really incredible work with Earth observation data, remote sensing technologies, and we're starting to talk about some of those technologies. Can you share with us just what role those technologies play in forecasting and not just forecasting risk, but helping to mitigate risk related to water scarcity and contamination?
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the organizers in allowing us to be part of this knowledge environment. Coming from the Earth observation milieu of knowledge, let's say, it's very important to understand what it offers us. It offers us the capacity to reflect on what we have already, how those interfaces between the natural world, the built world interact, how those dependencies on water interact, how fast does it flow through the surface, what communities, what is the amount of people living in those communities, how are they dependent on it, where does the water puddle, where does it flow at an exceeding speed so that it may impact built areas as well as ecosystems. So our Earth observation allows us to understand that across time. However, what we do within TerraFirma, we sort of question that part of observation, that passive part of that verb, and we're more inclined into modeling, into reconfiguring the geomorphology of the Earth to actually be able to manage these water flows, to actually be able to manage with nature-based solutions. Where is that water puddling? What is that surface? How are we able to control in a responsible way, not through technology, but through passive means, be able to understand how we can educate communities about how they use their land, as well as actively change the surface in order to be able to comply with better health outcomes. In other words as well, or in other terms, it allows us to generate cost-benefit analysis. How many cubic meters of water we are conserving? How are we allocating that through the land? How are we allocating that through our environment? And it allows us as well to communicate that in layman's terms, in visual terms, in 3D terms, in across time. This is how your house is going to be flooded. This is how your community is going to be affected. And this is how you're interacting with these bodies of water. And this is how it is affecting you in that feedback loop between nature and the human environment.
Terrific. And, talking about, we have cutting-edge technology that can help us to understand our risks, opportunities for mitigation. Turning, Alex, to you, if technology is giving us some tools to sort of diagnose and predict what's happening around us, how might nature help us to adapt and survive? And would love to hear your thoughts on how some of these nature-based solutions, wetland conservation, mangrove conservation, how can some of these solutions help us to, reduce dependence on some of these big infrastructure investments, while at the same time improve water security? So how do we harness sort of the power of nature to help mitigate some of these impacts?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I'd love to share a couple of slides that I have prepared.
Can someone?
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now we can see them. Yeah, and I'd really like to stress this evolution of how the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is envisioning ecosystems. In the previous decades, in all the IPCC reports, we would see sort of two axes, climate change and human society. And so risk depended on those two poles, let's say. But now they separated ecosystems, and you can see in this graph, which I love, is the interplay between those three elements. And so how climate change can affect ecosystems, but also how ecosystems can help mitigate climate change and also the impacts. Also human society and how it benefits from ecosystems, but also how human society affects these ecosystems, and of course the potential for restoration of ecosystems as part of the adaptation agenda. And I try to put some text on the relationship with water resources. And one of the things is that climate change is affecting availability of water because of higher variability. Sometimes it is scarcity, sometimes it's excess, and that also affects ecosystems. And of course, the human dimension, I think we've been talking a lot about that, and so how climate change affects humans through droughts and flooding, but there are other ways in which, well, water is really sort of the backbone of adaptation. And so we are in our institute, we work in Guatemala and also in El Salvador. And so we take this sort of landscape approach to adaptation. And so here you can see, this is what our landscape looks like. We have a lot of volcanoes in Central America, over 100 of them, some of them very active, and fragmented forests, forest patches with agriculture, rivers flowing. And so we've thinking of water, we have local actions for forest protection and restoration upstream. So in the volcanoes, for example, we've now using isotopes, studying the recharge areas and how that water is important for springs and so for community downstream access for water, because around 80% of people have wells in their homes, because the water table is very close to the surface at maybe 2 meters, 5 meters, and so they are highly dependent on groundwater. And so that's part of ensuring people have access to water is working with the ecosystem to help infiltration. And so the photos you see on the left-hand side, soil conservation is also key, not just for the soil and agriculture, which is also an adaptation capacity, but this type of techniques, as we have studied, also help infiltration of water, and so groundwater recharge. And also, so that is a great benefit. We should see the soil as our natural tank or a natural reservoir, because I mean, we need to store water, and that's something we are lacking. Guatemala stores only about 1.5% of available water, and despite having abundance of this resource, we have a lot of scarcity in the dry season because we just don't store it. But reservoirs and big dams are problematic. They are very costly, and so one of the alternatives is using the soil as storage for water. And so we've done a lot of work in restoration of riparian forests, for example, with communities, with companies. And so there are a lot of local arrangements for water management as well. And I just want to finish by saying how also data and the use of water is also key and is part of the restoration that has been going on for about 10 years in southern Guatemala. Sofia mentioned the conflict between large-scale agriculture activities with community use of water, that because of a big drought that we went through in 2016, there was a big crisis. There was a very, very intense conflict that was it was very, very close to becoming a violent conflict. Fortunately, people sat, they started talking, and they agreed on maintaining the river flow. It has been going on now for almost 10 years. And so that coordination at the local level to keep the river flowing all the way to the sea has been key to, for access to water for communities, but also to restore mangrove forests, fisheries, and a lot of. And you can read just the invitation to look for GLFX, South Coast Guatemala. Here are some resources where you can read about our restoration projects on the ground. And so just basically, just understanding the water cycle and working with all those nature elements and trying to restore the cycle, I think that's the best that we can do in terms of adaptation, conservation, and access to water.
Thank you. And Fiona, I'd love to turn to you because I know you and Just a Drop have been working closely with communities, sort of taking into account what the local water situation is, introducing some innovative approaches that can not only be applied locally, but also potentially adapted from other areas. Would love for you to share with us some of your experience and some of the innovations you're introducing. Oh, I think we're not. One.
It's on mute.
Sorry, yeah, it was
there
my
we go.
fault. I pressed the mute button. But yes, no, it's a very neat segue actually, following on from Alex talking about watersheds, which is something I'm very familiar with. And what I would say is that water security is absolutely a global issue because it affects communities the world over. but it's also a very localized issue. And for solutions to be sustainable in their impact, they need to reflect the local social, cultural, and environmental conditions. And to give you a really good example, and it's one from Kenya actually, but we also do watershed in Nicaragua, Alex, and we do check dams in India, and they follow similar principles. And the way we also create a bit of a multiplier effect is sharing the different insights in the different countries that we work, so that everybody learns from the different applications, but are sensitive to their own local environment. So behind me, you can see what we call a sand dam in Kenya. Now, Kenya is a semi-arid environment. There are many, many dry riverbeds, and when the rains fall, the water just dissipates into the atmosphere or gets lost out to sea. But by building a sand dam with local materials and the local community, over a period of time, sand builds behind the wall, and when the rains fall, it captures thousands of gallons of water, which give large communities access to water year-round. But the really significant and important thing is that they also mitigate climate change, because they raise the level of the water table. And so you can see behind me that whilst there's a sand dam built and there's water that's being collected in the sand, and there's thousands of gallons in that sand that get extracted with a hand pump by the local community, and obviously sand filters water and helps keep it clean, but it's the vegetation that gets built around that enables local communities to grow crops, for there to be greater vegetation, for there to be reduced soil erosion. So they become a very social, environmental, and economic game changer. And we've just been engaging in some research with the Royal College of Engineers and academics from Oxford, Delft, and Newcastle universities to look at the impact of sand dams specifically, in order to get to a point where we feel that we can absolutely evidence and justify increased investment and worthwhile investment into WASH programs. And some of the results are quite staggering from significant surveys. 212% increase in sustainable farming practices with increased vegetation and improved soil quality. And 95% increase in average crop harvest, a 40% increase in monthly household income, reductions in health-related expenditure because you're no longer suffering from waterborne diseases, reductions, over 50% reductions in water collection distances or time to collect water, which enables communities to do more income-generating activities. And also a really significant one I felt was 58% increase in women feeling able to take on male-dominated roles, reflecting growing gender equality, and many more benefits besides community cohesion, strengthened through participation and collective activities, better farming initiatives, resource sharing. So the impact of something as simple as a sand dam that is environmentally appropriate to the environment in which you're operating can be entirely owned and managed by a local community, but becomes a game changer for that community. And sometimes it's the simplest of technologies that have the greatest impact. And that's something that I think we need to recognize in this growing technical developing age. Sometimes keep it simple, stupid. What I call the KISS effect is actually at times the most impactful thing that can happen to community.
Thank you. And again, a reminder of this is important. It's something that affects all of us. Science is telling us ways in which not only can we see the interplay between, the impact of a changing climate on our own health, how that impacts water, how that in turn impacts our health. Science and technology is giving us tools to better understand these impacts, how we might mitigate, how we might plan. Nature is giving us tools and showing us ways that we might adapt in order to, again, to mitigate some of these effects. And Fiona, you've given, I think, a nice sort of introduction to kind of the third element in this conversation, which is, policymakers and those who are making decisions about investment and financing and how we might take some of these really important ideas to other communities and to scale where possible. So I, opening this up to all of you really, which is, how can policymakers integrate these kinds of, approaches to water conservation, ensuring access to clean water more explicitly into climate adaptation and public health strategies, recognizing that, there is an outsized importance in terms of access to safe water, and yet the funding and the scale of funding is simply not following. That those two things are not adding up. So how can policymakers integrate this more explicitly? And happy to open to anyone who wants to jump on that first.
Yeah, I can start with some reflections, but I guess we should recognize that water, sanitation, and health, the WASH acronym we mentioned, this means water, sanitation, and health, they are core components of resilience. So when there are plans of national or local adaptation plans, they should be explicitly mentioned as core components, and as well in climate finance frameworks. So recognizes the singularity of those aspects. And as my colleagues already mentioned, to prioritize nature-based solutions, because I think this is a win-win situation for climate health and even many other aspects in climate adaptation.
Yeah.
Alejandro, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Okay. No, I agree with Sofia. In a large measure, water access is seen as an infrastructure problem, so it's allocated funds as a one-time or maybe a maintenance funding strategy. I think if we pair that with national health security funding, it can allow for a larger pool of access to funds. So it's not only about installation of pipes, it's not only about installation of water, of infrastructure, it's more about sustaining the health of the community, and if it's seen from that optic, it can be more sustainable. I think, as well as Sofia mentioned, nature-based solutions can help take off a large part of the maintenance costs of those infrastructure in the long term, because as we embed ourselves into natural cycles, it's something that we can, in theory, a certain percentage of those maintenance costs allocate into the maintenance of nature and then access more conservation funds or agriculture or natural resources type of funding.
Yep, appreciate that. Alex and Fiona? Fiona, go ahead.
Just to add to what's already been said, I often talk about what I call the transformational triangle. And here what I'm trying to do is to encourage, I agree with this whole holistic approach. It's entirely the approach that Just a Drop takes. It's not just about water, but water's the start and the impacts that it has. We impact 12 out of 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's the power of water. But it's how do we make that happen better so that everybody in this world has access to a safe, consistent water supply. And, we all play a role. So through the transformational triangle, what I'm trying to encourage is governments, the private sector, and the third sector with local communities to collaborate more effectively together, drawing on their individual strengths and what each of them bring to the party to create better outcomes and results. So, governments are responsible for creating viable frameworks for businesses and the third sector to be able to operate efficiently and effectively. We need, in my view, as a business person most of my life, we need to be harnessing the power of businesses to help provide the engine and the necessary impetus to start to be the change that we want to see. But fundamentally, we also need the not-for-profit sector underpinning delivery on the ground. Because to be effective on the ground, you need the right organisations creating the right engagement with local communities to achieve sustainable, impactful outcomes. And so, to my mind, it's about us recognising the massive contribution that we can all make and the need to deliver it well, and the need to have a collective vision to demonstrate collaborative leadership, partnership, and get back to doing the right thing in the right way. And there's no one solution fits all. This is a macro global problem, but it is also driven, in my view, by many, many different localized solutions based on social, environmental, and economic need.
Terrific. And Alex, I know this has been an intense area of your work, and invite you to share some thoughts as well.
Yeah, and I'm particularly concerned about the rural areas in developing countries. And I think the critical point is, in terms of health, is quality. Yeah. And I think for policymakers, we need to think of alternative technologies, alternative systems that can deliver high quality or safe water for communities in rural areas, because that model of having grey infrastructure, pipes going to every home, having taps, I mean, it sounds nice, but the investment is just so big. And because rural communities, usually houses are spread out, this becomes even more costly. And if we just think of that as the system that will deliver high quality water, I think we're going to be lagging behind all the time. So those alternative technologies, and that's why I was interested, and I'm very interested in Alejandro's work, the institution, is because of those sort of independent and more locally managed ways of doing it. We have been trying, for example, rainwater harvesting in communities. I mean, rainfall is very high in Central America. We have a lot of it, and we just neglect it. We just send it to the pipe with all the wastewater, which is a shame. You know, it's such a precious resource. According to our studies, rainwater is not suitable for drinking, so it does need some level of purification. And so, for example, there are some local technologies with clay, with activated carbon. There's something called the eco-filter in Guatemala that is low cost. So that's something that we've been trying in communities and also in schools, because also schools, since you send all the children there, they need to have water to clean their hands. So hygiene is also very important, but also drinking water for children, particularly, I think, during heat waves like the one we had a year ago. Dehydration becomes a big problem for the health of children. So I think having access to safe drinking water should be the priority, and just thinking of alternative ways of delivering it is key.
I appreciate that, and these are, as you said, these sort of alternative technologies, these nature-based solutions. And looking ahead, I'm gonna shamelessly steal the question that Martin posed, which was sort of, as we're thinking about COP 30, which will be here in Brazil, an opportunity to really shed a spotlight on some of this. Again, Sofia, starting with you, what would you like to see at COP30? What's the most sort of important, urgent, actionable thing that needs to happen?
Well, I think decisions must be tangible, and discussions, as far as we are talking about systems and many things, this can be too abstract. So how to make this tangible and applicable? So I would like to see this conversation having this kind of outcomes at COP.
Yeah, Alejandro.
Yeah, I mean, on my part, it would be more insistence on indigenous knowledge. I think that is a thread that connects us four.
Yeah.
It's what people have on the ground, it's what they can manipulate, it's what they can work with to better their lives. And just funding into those modes of knowledge, which we term as nature-based solutions, but they've been available since pre-Columbine history. And we built civilizations on top of that.
Yeah.
So it's not that new, and it's quite sustainable, and it has been for history.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Alex?
Yeah, I think priority to wash systems, and of course there's always the discussion about whether that's development or climate adaptation, but I think there is a very clear connection, and especially during hurricanes and tropical storms, a lot of the community and, well, in general, water infrastructure is affected. So I think adaptation plans for saving water infrastructure, or even the damages and losses, there should be funding for restoring those community and cities infrastructure for water, because it should be the first priority, that people have access to safe drinking water.
Yeah, and Fiona, would love to hear your thoughts as well.
It's very similar, just worded probably slightly differently. I would say get real. We need to bridge the gap between the big macro picture, think local, give more respect to local solutions, more investment into it. Take the big picture and start to localize things more. We need to give more credit to local communities, local organizations with the right frameworks, the right checks and balances, but recognize that investment in WASH is returned at least fivefold. As I said before, it impacts at least 12 of the Sustainable Development Goals. That doesn't need to be repeated. It is a worthwhile investment. It changes people's lives, and it gives them their lives and livelihoods back.
Yeah. Agree and appreciate that. And we do have one question, and I think we've got a few minutes left. I've had a question come in from the audience, which I'm happy to open to anyone who wants to answer. How can academic research and evidence-based solutions be grounded in the realities of the gendered impact of water management and decision-making?
Well, if I can talk about the academic research part of it, I think don't stay at the academia, go outside, know the realities. We have funding for field work that should be accompanying our research, even if we talked about AI and all of that kind of technologies, but this isn't just a computer solution. This is a real-world solution. So go outside and understand these realities.
Understand, bringing it back to the communities. Fiona, I think you wanted to say something as well.
Well, we've just been engaging in research to assess impact on communities, and it is about giving voice. It's about helping empower women and girls to take ownership and be part of the solution making for their local communities. It's a big part of giving them the the belief and the confidence to actually shape the communities that they want and drive themselves. So it's giving voice, and if you prioritize that, then actually it's not difficult to do. You just need to create the right framework for that to happen.
Agree. Any other? Yeah, Alex, I think you were.
Yeah, because that's exactly what we do in Guatemala. We decided to work at the local level, and we work alongside local communities, including indigenous communities, companies, local governments. And so we are there on the ground with people, understanding their concerns, the impacts, bringing science to them. Communicating science is not easy, but it's something that needs to happen. And I think when people feel that academics are next to them and trying to understand and also help find solutions, I think they appreciate it a lot more. And one way, very practical way of doing it is that we have interns from different universities, and they have to do their thesis or their internship on local problems. And so that really forces them to interact with people and to make contributions. Some of them we have hired afterwards, or they go to the government, but I think that connection is very important, that interaction with all the stakeholders.
Thank you. And Alejandro, happy
Yes,
to give you the...
I think academic research has a very important position in terms of funding, whether they acquire funding in order to be able to implement ideas into the community, or if they gather information from the community in order to be able to generate plans, or just the source data or the source information to be able to represent that to larger government organizations. I think that's a very important role academics have, whether they're students, whether they're professors, whether they're administrators. And I think taking ownership of that and being able to represent women in particular, because as Fiona was mentioning, women have a very important role in maintaining social cohesion, in maintaining, in maintaining, the social, let's say, nutrients, the social bodies in these communities, the water accessibility in these communities. Fiona knows much more than I do in that respect. But I think being able to voice the concerns of these communities into larger bodies of knowledge is very important. And that's an important role academics have.
Thank you, and I know we're coming up on time. To summarize, we start with the recognition that water is so fundamental to everything. It's big, it's everywhere, so very macro, but at the same time, incredibly local. And there's a nice blending of sort of cutting edge technologies that can help us to understand how communities are impacted by water, cutting edge technologies that can help us even harness water as a source of information and evidence-based decision-making to strengthen public health, preparedness and response to public health emergencies. But there's also sort of on the other end of the spectrum, nature itself, the planet itself, that already has solutions. Just the contours of the land can give us insights as well as solutions that can be very tangible for communities. And I was struck by that. It can be overwhelming to think about how to approach the challenge of sort of climate and planet and health. But within our communities and within our own ecosystems, we may have the tools available to us in a very hands-on way to start to have solutions that not only impact an individual person's health or a community's health, but access to things like nutrition, agricultural systems, again, sort of laddering up into livelihoods and prosperity, so that, again, taking it back, communities aren't just surviving what's happening to them, but can have a real hand in making sure that they're able to thrive. And hopeful that we have the opportunity at COP30 to bring that in front of those who are making decisions. There are solutions, they're very tangible, they are community-led, they are responsive to the sort of planetary health, population health, and prosperity, which I think is what we're all looking for. So thank you to all of the panels, and I believe we're going to have an opportunity to dive more into water over lunch, but I'll leave that to be described, and just want to say thank you.
Thank you.